My name is Jeff Loehr, and I have been really advising companies around the world for the past 20 years. Let me share my screen here, because that's going to be just much more fun for us to follow the slides than to look at me the whole time. So I figure rather than the standard, headshot, I just turn it upside down a little bit, look at things from a slightly different perspective. You can see this. You see me standing on my hand?
That's you. Hey, nice.
Yeah. So as you guys know, right, in addition to being a business advisor and advising businesses, really both through crises and through strategic changes and through growth, in addition to that, I do teach yoga. And one of the things that I've been working on over the past 6 months is how I bring those different teachings and ways of teaching together and to provide my own coaching program and really focus on business. But my focus is on how to advance slides. So my focus, my mission is to help entrepreneurs live an extraordinary life by creating a business that powers that life rather than sucking the energy out of it. So this is what I work on. The problem that I see is that far too many businesses are just work-generating machines rather than life-generating machines. So I'm looking at how we can actually change that. And at the moment, I work with Rosenberg Chesnov, and it's an accounting firm here in Westchester. They do great work supporting startups and getting all of the sort of financial pieces together. And what's exciting about Rosenberg Chesnov is they also do a lot of this advisory work. So we bring the advisory work into the accounting work so that we're actually helping companies do better, not just reporting on their financials. And then for anybody who wants to read some of my ramblings and concepts, you can follow me at jeffloehr.com. So that's a little bit about me. And then what we said we'd go through today is this idea of managing in a crisis and how to manage in a crisis. And like I said, I've been working in advisory and helping people think through these things for about 20 years now. I've dealt with crises ranging from economic crises, in the 2008, 2009 time frame to problems with dictators trying to take over our operations, to issues with negotiations and theft, and I mean all kinds of crises, right? And what I've discovered is really that there are 3 levels of managing crises. There are 3 ways that we have to think about this, right? And the first level is really the idea of managing self. So when you're in a crisis situation or any management situation, really, you have to start with management of self. And that's just the idea of putting your mask on first, right? So you've got to put the mask on first before you can help anybody else. And then you have to develop whatever your principles are, right? What are the principles for management? What are the values? What are the ways that you think about management? So in this case, to continue the analogy of putting the mask on first, it's really, you put the mask on first so that you can breathe, be calm, and survive, right? Because if you don't put the mask on first, then you're dying, and then you're trying to put the mask on your kid, and you can't breathe, and you can't put the mask on the kid, so everything falls apart, and you can't get anything done, right? So you have to put the mask on first so that you can breathe, be calm, survive. Those are the principles, right? And then you take actions. So the actions that you might take, right, are to help others with their mask in the case of the airplane, right? So those are the actions that you would take. In this case, we take actions to build a business. And I'll talk starting from self. Self is the more esoteric sort of woo-woo concept, right, about who we are. And then we move into principles, which is a little bit more detailed. And then I'll spend a little bit more time just going through some of the actions, because those are the practical things that we want to do now. But the only way you can do the actions is if you've managed self and established your principles. Sound good?
Yeah, gotcha.
So when it comes to managing self, the thing to keep in mind is, that we exist within a context, right? So right now we exist within a context. We exist within a context of, right now Rome is burning, right? The world seems to be coming to an end, and we've got riots, we've got violence, and we've got looting, and it's almost interesting to think that on top of that, layered in with that, we've got this idea of a global pandemic. And this virus is actually killing people. So at the same time, right? And it's not coincidence that it's the same time. At the same time, we have these crises, and what that leads to, obviously, is this dramatic change in the economy, right? Like it is amazing how quickly the economy has shifted. This has never happened in the history of economies that we know of, right? Nothing like this has happened. Then we go from 4% unemployment to 30% unemployment. Does not happen, and yet it did, right? That's where we are. And to a lot of people, this feels like the end of the world, right? And this has an end of the world feeling to it. So what I like to do now is I like to then take people and say, all right, take a moment. So you guys, as my participants here, take a moment and just think about how this will impact you. And if you're watching the recording, take a moment and think about how this could impact you. Write down a couple of bullet points. How will the end of the world impact you? Your smile, Ryan. Wait, you think I'm not tricking you here? I just want you to write it down. I want you to focus for a moment on all of the things that are possibly going to happen to destroy you. Because there are a lot out there.
So we're talking about things that are going to happen to end the world, or what would be affected?
I'm saying with the context that's going on around you, how is it potentially going to impact you, right?
Got it.
And some of the things that come up are things like I might lose my job, I might lose my life, my kids might lose their life, I can't get educated, right? Like there's a lot of potential things that can happen. And so the next question that I like to ask is to rate your anxiety. And if you look at your anxiety from a 1 to 10, right? 1, you're completely calm, and 10, you can't get anything done due to anxiety. And if we're honest,
before you posed that question, I was at a 1 before you started. I'm about an 8 right now.
Right. So now you're at an 8, right? And that's what happens. That's what happens if you go out and you pay attention to what's going on in the world, right? The anxiety goes up like that, and that brings in a level of anxiety. And that 8, that conversation is deep in the amygdala. So on the left-hand side, that's where that 8 resides. Deep within the reptilian brain, deep within the part of the brain that has that fight or flight response, right? And that anxiety, when you sit in that anxiety, that's where you're making decisions. But the problem is that we need to make decisions using the neocortex on the right-hand side. And if you're in that state of anxiety, if you're in that 8 space, you don't have access to the neocortex. You don't have access to the thinking space. So you have to find a way to calm down the fight or flight response, because you cannot make good decisions if you're caught in fight or flight. Right? You cannot make good decisions. So you have to find a way to create space. And when people tell me it's the end of the world, or it feels like it's the end of the world, my response is always, it's not that the end of the world is going to happen. The end of the world has happened. It's over. The world that you knew is completely gone. Right? We lost John. Hopefully he'll come back. But the world that we knew is gone, right? And it's just like you can't unsee what you've seen. We can't undo what's been done. It is done, right? But on the other hand, the world continues to exist, right? It's just our perception of it. And the fact of the matter is that today is not any less certain than 3 months ago. And there's a mythology that, things are uncertain today. But they're not uncertain today. I was giving a workshop in February where we were talking about a strategy for the next year. We laid it all out with certainty. Guess what? None of that's happening because the world came apart, right? The uncertainty was there, we just didn't know about it. Today, the uncertainty is still there, and we know about it. That's all that's changed, is we have more clarity. So we have to bring the attention back onto the journey and recognize the fact that we're on this journey, and we have to find a way to pay attention to the journey and not just be stuck in all of the shit that's happening around us. So how do we do that? And Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, Viktor Frankl discovered this as a prisoner in a concentration camp in World War II. And he discovered that there was a space between his perception of the world that he was in and how he lived within that perception. And that by separating himself from what was going on, he could choose his response. He could work on his book. He could do other things in his mind, right? And a lot of people discovered this in the concentration camps. And if Viktor Frankl can do it, right, in that kind of a condition, then we can do it in the situation that we're in today, because it's not nearly as bad as what he was going through. So how do we create space? I'm going to give you 4 strategies, but the first one is dead easy. Dead easy. It is just simply gratitude. You hear this in so many forms. Count your blessings. Be thankful for what you have. Keep a journal, right? And I guarantee if you take a moment now and just write down a couple of things that you're grateful for, right? So if you're watching the recording, pause this, write it down. You guys can write something down now. If you write something down now that you're grateful for, and if you focus on that, then rate your anxiety. And in all likelihood, you'll find that your anxiety has come down, right? Because you're taking the focus away from the fact that it's the end of the world, and you're focusing on the things that are right here and matter to you in the present moment. Some other ways to create, so this is how we can start to make space so that we don't get stuck in that anxiety. Another way to make space is really just to take a breath, right? Here's the yoga coming in, but it really makes a huge difference, right? Take a breath. Take 5 breaths. That deep breath is going to calm the amygdala, okay? That deep breath is going to signal to the brain that you're okay. Another way to breathe is what I call square breathing, where you might inhale for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold empty for 4 seconds, and then you go round in a square. It's just concentrated breathing, and it takes your mind off of all the things that are happening and focuses them on the breath, right? And the third one is to bring the focus on the now. So you can do that by focusing on your senses, on what's happening to you right now, rather than what's happening to you in a completely separate part of the world. So that's that's where I think we need to start when we talk about crisis management. Any thoughts or questions before I move on?
No, it's funny. It's like the principles for, best ways to be happy and angry, right? They're very similar, just coming from the other side.
It's the same thing, because the difference is what makes you unhappy is all of the crap. Like, you can't be unhappy if you're in the moment. Because there isn't, the unhappiness is the ego bringing things in from outside. But it's also key to making good decisions. And so it's not just about being happy, it's about how are you going to make good decisions, right? And you can only make good decisions when you're not in fight or flight. So once we have the self under control, right? Once we're separating between all of the shit that's happening and ourself and what that means, right? Then we can start talking about principles of management. I want to suggest certain principles of management, certain ways to be in a crisis. And this is certainly true with COVID, but I've also found it to be true, when a dictator is taking over your mind, or when you're managing a riot at an operation, or whatever the issues are, right? These principles tend to be pretty valuable. Okay, so the first one is just to reduce stimuli. So one of the things that creates the need to create space is the fact that we're always on and always paying attention to everything that's going on. So if you shut that down, it's like you said, John, you were at a 1 until I brought up all of the things. And it's those stimuli that create the need to make space. So you can reduce the stimuli. Check the news once a day, not once every 5 minutes, right? The second one is to get clarity and to work on what you can. So there's stuff that you can control and stuff that you cannot control. And if your focus is always on the stuff that you cannot control, then that is going to be self-defeating. So you have to bring the focus back to what you can control. Get clarity about what you can control, what you can do, right? I prefer to give these talks in front of a live audience because then I get feedback and I know what's going on. I can't do that, so I give the talks where I can give the talks. The third one is to let go of what was and focus on what is. So we have a tendency to say, well, my business was, I don't know how many, I've talked to so many clients who they say, I was making $300,000 a month. Now I'm making 40. The world has come to an end. Say, well, okay, I get that. I get how that feels, but that $300,000 a month is gone. And it's not just going to come back tomorrow. It's gone. So you have to focus on what is today, on what you're building today, on what's in front of you today. And all of that time spent on bemoaning what was in the past is just wasted time. The next one is to shift from scarcity to abundance. So we have a zero, generally as human beings, this zero-sum game mentality where my win is your loss, your win is my loss. And you know, that does not help us in a crisis situation, any crisis situation, because if I'm worried about creating a win for you rather than creating a win for both of us, it's just self-defeating, right? So if we can shift, and I actually recommend, this is one thing I see for entrepreneurs all the time, shift away from this idea of a zero-sum game, move towards the idea of abundance, right? There is plenty for everybody. And so with that in mind, you shift from trying to worry about the past and remake what was and defeat the situation to working on helping others and solving problems, right? And if you can focus your time and energy on helping others and solving problems, that eventually is going to pay you back, right? That eventually is going to come back to you in terms of your business, in terms of growth, in terms of the problem that you're trying to solve. The next one is really to practice compassion because, you know, we are in a situation where people are struggling. Some people are struggling to pay their bills. People are struggling to, get to work. People are struggling to work because they've got kids at home and bad internet connections, and they have to go to the office in the rain to get stable connections, and everything's falling apart, right, John? I mean, there is a lot going on here, and we can really be upset with everybody, or we can find ways to practice compassion and give each other space. I don't know how many Zoom calls I've been on where kids have come into them, you know, babies screaming in the background, dogs, you know, it's fine. We practice compassion, right? And if you think about it, it'd be nice if our police practiced a little bit more compassion, right? And then the last one is to act, because I think that one of the challenges we face is that people tend to get really stuck in inaction. They tend to get stuck in I don't know how to describe it other than like it's the allure of Netflix and the couch, you know, that every day blends into another day and I'm at home and I can just not act. And even if it's not Netflix and the couch, I see a lot of business people who are just stuck, you know, and they just can't take action. They're just confused about it. And so I think no matter what you do, if you act, then you're moving in the right direction. So these are the principles that I like to suggest, right? I think the more important thing is not necessarily that you follow my principles. There's a bullet missing. I don't know where the bullet went, but this is supposed to have a bullet here. Let go of what went. It's not about following my principles. I think these are pretty good. I find these useful. It's about establishing what your principles are, right? Because once you've mastered self and you say, okay, this is where I am, that self helps you choose what your response is going to be. right? So Viktor Frankl, when he's sitting there in the concentration camp, he uses that to choose what his response is going to be, and then he responds based on his values and his principles, the way he sees things. And we can respond based on our values and our principles and the way we see things. Or you can use mine because they're pretty good and they're, come on. You gonna do better? No. But I want to pause there, right? And see if you guys have any questions, if anybody's on, if they have any questions.
I don't know if I have any questions. I think a lot of this rings true, and especially given like the current situation of things. I mean, and the fact of inaction. I mean, I feel like before that was always like a paralysis or an analysis paralysis kind of a thing, and now it's just straight up. One day bleeds into the next, as you mentioned. So the thought or the idea of getting up and doing anything is all of a sudden has so much more weight attached to it.
Also, it's that their actions feel like they're going to be like the action that dictates everything for the future. So you want to make sure you take the right action, right? Like right now, it feels like, all right, which direction I choose is going to be the path forever, right?
Yeah. It's just
I find that as well. Like, well, whatever I do now has so much more importance, right? But why does it have any more importance?
Right.
It's actually not. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, I'm not perfect, but I think that the actions that we take now, we're just building, and we have to see what they lead to, but inaction leads to nothing. Yeah. And I actually think it's the same thing as analysis paralysis, right? Because now what we're doing is we're analyzing our situation. Should I act or should I not act? Should I do or should I not do? Am I doing the right things? Am I not doing the right things? It's actually the same thing. Like if you are prone to analysis paralysis, as I am, in good times, right, then that is just going to kill you in times like these, right? Because you're going to be stuck with that same uncertainty around what you should do. And that causes a drive to run away and hide, at least in my world. I don't know. I just want to dig a hole in the sand, stick my head in, and hope for the world to come to an end. I don't know if you saw, there was this guy who was on a retreat, a 75-day, silent retreat, and he comes back. I was just thinking, man, I want to go on a retreat right now.
I was going to say. Oh man, yeah, it's timing. Sheesh.
But that's not my calling to be on a retreat at the moment. Yeah. So. Any other thoughts?
Not really. It's
so
kind of falling into place here.
So what that leads to is the action, right? Now everybody always wants the actions. They want to start with the actions. They want me to tell them, well, what do I have to do now that I have a business, right? So this is the part we have to take notes, because this is the part that people really care about. But I guarantee you that you cannot take the actions in a way that is consistent with what you want and that delivers the results that you want if you haven't first mastered self and established what your principles are. Right? You must master self and you must establish your principles. Otherwise, you just take random actions, and that doesn't build to the thing that you want it to build to. So I like to start with the idea that there is no normal, right? There's this conversation that's happening around the new normal and the old normal, and when will things return to normal, and what is normal, and it's all completely ridiculous. There is no normal. There is no such thing as normal. Change is the only constant, right? It will continue to change forever. There is nothing that's normal, right? We exist in a world of uncertainty with all of the challenges that uncertainty presents to us. So the things that we actually do in a situation like this are very similar to the things that we have to do in a non-crisis situation, right? It's just a puzzle that needs to be solved. We just have to look at the problem and come up with what the solution is. Now, what is different, right, is that a lot of businesses are in crisis. Like that business that I talked about, they had $300,000 a month. Now they have $6,000 a month, and they're building back up to 40. But, right, what happens in that case? How do you deal with that kind of a situation? So it's not that we're building from strength. We're all building from a crisis type of situation. So the way to think about it is the same way that you think about delivering first aid. So have any of you ever been to a first aid course? I know, John, we were talking beforehand about how you're going to have to do first aid, right?
Yeah.
Have you done it yet?
I did it. I passed.
What's the first step in giving first aid?
The first step is giving first aid is checking for breath. I feel like this is a tricky one. I don't know. It depends.
You're talking about CPR?
So, huh?
Yeah, first aid's pretty
first aid.
pretty
Like
general.
Aid, like where are we going?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I thought this was pretty universal. Maybe it's not, but in my world, it's pretty universal, right? The first step to giving first aid, if you've got somebody who's up there and their arm is gushing blood, they've been in an accident, right?
Oh, it's
the
one of
first
those.
thing that you have to do, right, is you got to stop the bleeding.
Okay. All right. I don't know if we had like a choking guy at a restaurant or like what was going on
All right,
there.
So it's a choking guy at a restaurant, but it's the same sort of thing. It's the same situation. He's choking, so you got to get the thing out of the right. You've got to identify. Okay, he's choking. You've got to get him out of the choking position into a Heimlich maneuver, and then you have to make a plan to actually deliver the Heimlich maneuver, right? And with choking, it's very fast. With somebody, in my mind, this is somebody who's in an auto accident, on the freeway. And they've got, and you've got to do the tourniquet, and you've got to figure out, okay, first I got to stop the bleeding, right? And then you've got to make a plan for how you're going to administer first aid, and then you actually have to deliver the cure, right? You have to act. And again, it's this idea of action that comes into it, right? But you stop the bleeding, you make a plan, you cure, you do the same thing with your business. And I love this quote from Einstein. I don't actually think Einstein ever said this, by the way, but it's attributed to Einstein, and he's such a great picture to put on a slide, really attributes authority to the person giving the speech that I'm just going to stick with it, right? If I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes solving it. And the first thing we have to do, if you're looking at your business, is you have to figure out what you have to do to solve the business problem. And then you can work on solving it, right? And the first step to that is that you create some sort of budget and track cash. So this is the first part of stopping the bleeding, is knowing where your money is going, right? And it's amazing how many people don't know where their money is going. But get a handle on the financial situation. Know what the financial situation is going to be. Forecast your revenue. Forecast your profit. What money is coming in, right? Forecast your costs. What is fixed and what is variable? And remember that in the long run, and we're in the long run, all costs are variable. Everything is negotiable. Right? And it sounds a little basic, but this is what has to happen. This is how you start managing your business. This is how you get clarity. It's one of the principles, right? This is how you define the problem, stop the bleeding, is you have to figure out what the situation is. What are your inflows? What are your outflows? And I've got a couple of templates here to help with that, right? So you can get this budget template, and burn rate calculator that will help you understand, what the cash situation of the business is, right? And that's where we start to understand the cash situation, and then we find some cash. And finding the cash is when you apply for, and obtain an SBA loan or a PPP loan. You evaluate your open lines of credit. Right, you consider home equity financing. It's interesting because I've talked to people who we're finally getting some of these SBA loans, right? And people are asking me, well, should I take the SBA loan? Should I even do this? Well, if you're bleeding, you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to bring in the cash. And if that's going to cost you something, it's going to cost you something. But it gives you a way to be ready for what's coming tomorrow. You've got to stop the bleeding. So finance, and you can negotiate with lenders and creditors. You can talk to your banks for deferral options. I mean, it's amazing how the banks have been very forgiving at the moment. There are lots of deferral options on loans. There are lots of deferral options on mortgages. There are lots of ways to find cash and stop that outflow by talking to the banks and talking to the creditors, right? On the other hand, you want to pay the bills you can. So your payment is my income, my payment is your income. So there's sort of this balance between doing making sure that you're stopping the bleeding and that you're also doing the right thing by the people that are around you. And that's why you have to come back to the principles, right? So what is principled for you? Maybe I can't afford to pay you the full price, but I pay you what I can, and then we agree on something deferred later. I don't know, whatever that situation is. But this is really the first stop in terms of business actions, right? Is to stop the bleeding by creating a budget, understanding what the situation is, getting your clarity, and then finding the cash to be able to stay alive. From there, we go to making a plan. So I love this quote from one of the angel investors. We have two types of companies in our portfolio. Some are saying it is a great time for development. We've got our heads down and we're going to make unbelievable strides in the next few months. And then we have the whiners. We're investing in the developers, right? Comes back to the action. Comes back to, do they have a plan for what they're going to do? And the ones who've structured a plan and they know how they're going to execute, they can take advantage of this time. The ones who don't have to sit back and hope that it goes away. So there's this idea of creating a strategy, right? And I'm going to just talk quickly through the idea of creating a scenario strategy, because I think everybody should look at this for the moment, right? Think about what the future is going to be. How is your business, that business that you just defined in the first couple of steps, going to exist tomorrow, next year, a year from now, 3 years from now? And you really have to do that in a structured way. And the first step is to define the game. What do you do? What is your impact? What is the problem you solve? Know what you do. Check its relevance, right? So if you're a virologist at the moment, you've got a lot of opportunity, right? If you're a fitness instructor, you've got some issues that you're going to have to figure out how to solve in a different way. Then you have to identify the uncertainties. What is out there that you do not know? What is out there that you don't know what could possibly change in the world around you, right? And the more you can understand what's uncertain, the more you can start planning them by creating the scenario. So you can look at how might these uncertainties play out, what might the future look like. And then once you create the scenarios, you identify options for your business. So when the uncertainties play out in certain ways, right, then you can come back and say, well, what are the options that I can do within each one of those scenarios? And then finally, you choose the options for the things that you want to pursue. So I'll give you just a quick, so choose options, and then you create a plan with the targets and the metrics. So a book that I recommend to think about this is The Mind of a Fox. It's a very useful way for thinking about scenario strategy, and it's built on the principle that you should assume that the world is going to change, that you embrace the uncertainty inherent in that, and so you're always looking for new ideas. And the scenarios that I'm working with for a moment, for the moment, are these, where I think the big uncertainties in the world, the big scenario axes, if you will, are whether we as societies can go towards an infinite game or whether we get stuck in this zero-sum game, right? So are we going to be at each other's throats, or are we going to realize that there's plenty out there for us to create? And then there's the question as to whether the systems crumble or the systems hold, right? And you can think about what it means. If systems crumble and we're in an infinite game, we're in a world of reinvention. If we're in an infinite game and systems hold, we've got a nice strong renewal. We've got the same systems, but we're open to new things. Systems hold and it's a zero-sum game, we get into a martial law, right? So, Trump and the Republicans, they're in martial law territory. Let's bring in the military, right? What does that mean for your business? What does your business look like in a martial law situation? Systems crumble with a zero-sum game, broken worlds. This is anarchy. There are a lot of people who are calling for anarchy at the moment. So I use this and then look at this in terms of, well, what are the options that my business has or my client's business have in each one of these? And then we can think about which ones are the options that are common in each one and which ones are the ones that our flyers that we need to be careful with? What do we delay? But using this type of structure helps you think and plan for the uncertainty. So my fourth step then is to develop an employment strategy. So now that you know what your options are, you've got to deal with your team and your people, right? And when you have the strategy, you know where you're going to go, you've got your plan. How are you going to resource that plan? And I don't know, have you guys seen the Weight Watchers versus the Airbnb example of laying people off?
No.
So it's a wonderful example. I mean, truly wonderful, because it comes back to your principles. The way you do things, it comes back to your principles. The way you lay people off comes back to your principles. Weight Watchers, right, called people in via Zoom, tens at a time, and said, hey, in 3 minutes, you guys are laid off, goodbye. And the reason they did that is they said, well, it was too annoying to have in-person phone, too annoying to have in-person calls, right? Too annoying to have in-person conversations. Airbnb had to let go of, I can't remember, thousands of people. But they did it with with respect. They told people, they had one-on-one conversations. They agreed to write, they wrote recommendation letters for these people. They turned their recruitment, department into an outsourcing department, finding jobs for people, right? They gave them their computer. They gave them equity in the company. So even if their equity hadn't vested, they gave them the equity in the company, so they were still vested in the company, right? So even though these people are being laid off, they are still advocates of Airbnb. And I think what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of companies out there are following the Weight Watchers model, but the opportunity is in defining your principles and how you think about it, and perhaps following more the Airbnb model, right? Because that is an infinite game. That is the opportunity for you to have people come back in the future. So from there, you have to think about who your vital and non-vital employees are. You can negotiate with people and consult an employment attorney around furloughs and layoffs and voluntary unpaid time, and I've seen a lot of people come up with creative solutions around how can we implement some of these options that we have identified and developed and decided are critical for our company, even though we don't have enough money. We can use some of this PPP money for that, right? We can bet on the future, but if there's no cash, there's no cash. How are we going to do this? And there are a lot of interesting creative solutions that are coming up for those who are thinking about how to create a business for the future rather than get stuck in the paradigm of the past, right? And that's the last point. So how can you engage people in creating that future, even as you have to change, even as you have to have those difficult conversations, right? So I also have a point there around delegation versus abdication. So by focusing on the things that matter, you can delegate work rather than abdicate work, but it doesn't really fit here, so we'll just pretend it doesn't exist. We can cut that out later, okay, John? So that's the idea behind making a plan. You create a business strategy, you create an employment strategy, a resources strategy. How are you going to deliver on that plan that you have? And then finally, you have to take action, right? So this is really about implementing solutions. What are the things that you have to do now? Create projects that you didn't, that you have wanted to do but haven't had time. Build your website, do Zoom calls, right? Create different options for your business. Build relationships. Like, this is a great time for loss leaders, right? This is the only time when the bank is going to give you a break on the mortgage, so you can say, I can work for you for free to demonstrate my capabilities so that you hire me for lots of money later, And this is the time to build those relationships. And the more we can focus on implementing solutions and building those relationships, the better off the businesses are going to be in the future. And the final piece is to communicate. And this is, whether you're communicating with your employees, with your clients, with your partners, if you ignore everything else in my stop the bleeding, make a plan, and cure process, don't forget this one. Because it's the communication and the engagement of people that is going to keep them around, that is going to give you options in the future. And I've seen so many crises managed. I mean, I've had to deal with massive, I had to deal with 2 large-scale union very contentious union negotiations. And in one of them, we communicated obsessively, right, all the time. And I won't say it went smoothly, but we negotiated, we avoided a strike. They got some of what they wanted, we got some of what we wanted. We came to a peaceful resolution, right? In the second one, the managers refused to communicate, and it went straight to a strike. And I think that's the difference. If we communicate, we can make things happen. If we don't communicate, we're in the hands of everybody else. So that's my business actions model, right? And the whole thing coming together is you have to make space, stop, fight or flight, get perspective. Then we've got the 7 principles, and then we've got the 6 actions that you need to take as a business in order to go forward and thrive and to create that extraordinary business. So again, thoughts, comments?
I think it's just great how this is laid out, where there's almost an actionable step guidelines piece here. I think when you take this in the gray area that it is in the real world, when you don't have a bullet list, it's hard to put this stuff together. But when you say start here, then go here, then go here, and each thing has a subset, it's almost like, oh yeah, that's not so bad. It's more palatable, it's more manageable.
The problem with this presentation is there are a lot of lists, and I get that, right? But the reason I'm giving people all of these lists and trying to have lots of bullets and lots of ways of thinking about this is for that reason, that I think that it's more actionable that way. When you break it up into chunks, then you can do it, and you can think at different times about self, the principles, and the actions that you have to take. And if you start from the center and go out, then it really directs your actions. And that's my point with the Weight Watchers versus Airbnb, is that if you are principled and you know what your principles are, it's going to guide you to that Weight Watchers. I'm going to just fire people via Zoom in a heartless, senseless way, or I'm going to be more engaging versus to Airbnb. And as much as I put a qualifier on that and say that Weight Watchers is heartless and senseless, they're following their principles. That's the way their organization is, and the problem becomes when they want to be something else and they're not living by it, right?
That's hard to shake in this day and age too. I mean, you have one big bad press story like that, and it follows you around, haunts you across digital and physical space for a very long time. It's hard to get rid of that.
Well, it does, but it's also one of those things where it takes different people have different approaches, right? So it may be that people relate to that approach more. Like I relate to the Airbnb approach. I suspect you relate to the Airbnb approach. But there are a lot of people who may relate more to the Weight Watchers approach.
Well, it also sounds like the Weight Watchers approach. Well, the Weight Watchers approach is less of an approach, right? They didn't put the time in to think out the real solution. They just said, this is annoying to call this many people and talk to people individually. So it's just lacking in approach.
It's lacking in approach, which reveals their principle. Yeah. Their principle is one of we don't give a damn.
Yeah. Well, and I think they did take an approach, though. They just took the approach of path of not of least resistance, but what's the fastest way to get the job done, And if maybe that is at the principle level, I don't know. But yeah, I agree. And I think in this day and age, it's to some level that's admirable to be efficient, but when it comes at the cost of bringing people in and canning them in groups of 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever you said, I mean, you draw a line somewhere, right? Where you need to take a humanistic approach to dealing with just about everything across your company.
Right, but if you look if you look at what we did with Koi, right, during this time, like 3 months, we decided to pause our memberships, and we felt like that was the ethical approach that would be kind of returned in kind when, we didn't know how long this was going to last. This could have been 6 months, and we could have been out of business, but at least initially, that was the approach that we took, and it didn't take a long time to make that plan, but it was in line with kind of the values that we defined for the company.
And it's weird to think about that
knowing
and
you,
say
I
that
think
out
you
loud.
have pretty strong values inherently built in, right?
Yeah. But it's weird to think that that's a self and that's a principle where it's kind of like the do unto others kind of thing. Like you almost feel like it's a no-brainer, but when it comes to a business or a corporation, I mean, it's a different game that you're playing sometimes, you know, and it's hard to, I don't know, like personally and professionally, it's hard to think that there is another way to look at it. But I mean, in the Weight Watchers example, you see that shift, you know, where it's like, yeah, but we have to be efficient. So, all right, it was fun, but see you later, kind of a thing.
So I actually think there is. I think that what we're seeing though is that there are those who are obsessively focused on the return to the investor. So you know the business school method has ethos has been this idea of you must deliver the best return to the investor in the short term, right? That's what they teach you when you go to business school. And I think that there's another way to think about it, which is more of a human-centric approach. And I think that over time, so in the short term, that investor-centric approach will yield a better return because you fire people more quickly, right? You don't have to put as much time or effort into it. In the long term, I think that the information cycle, the reputation damage, and everything that does to you creates a massive issue that ends up destroying the company and costing you a fortune in recreating. And I think that there is an issue when you become too investor-centric and not human-centric that you end up with a massive with a problem. And that over time, human-centric is better for investors as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, guys. So, any other questions? Hi there, Scott. You're down below my screen here, so I was only seeing the other three guys. So, and we've got Danny. Have you been on the whole time? Have you guys been on the whole time?
I came on about maybe 6-7 minutes ago.
Oh, right. We missed the good part.
Yeah. Well, thanks for walking through. I mean, you're a great connector and brain in the community and the industry. I mean, the minutes that I got were awesome.
Well, it's going to be recorded. I mean, I love both of you, your thoughts and opinions on this. I think that this is what I've been guiding people through and how I've been helping them deliver and I come back to that human-centric mission, which I'm quite passionate about. But really thinking through if you want to execute correctly, going through this concept of getting out of that fight or flight, managing the principles or the values, the way you want to engage with the world, and then deciding what the actions are. And this is just a model that I come back to all the time. And not just because it only has 3 steps, which I can remember. I can't remember 5-step models anymore, but I can do 3. So, and you can see even my 6-step model, I have to break into 3 big steps and then 6 little steps because I can't do more than 3.
Yeah. On that, I mean, what I did catch, I love the bias towards action. And, you have it in this 7 principles here on this slide, but I caught, the project implementation and really when you dove into, you got to take action. And I love that. I think that's about iteration. I think it's about self-discovery too. I think it's about business modeling all within, those steps, at least from my brain. And I know all of that, quite well. So whoever is watching this, I'd fully trust, the fuller process that you walk through. And I'd love to learn more about it. But I love the bias to action.
Yeah, well, I think we have to have, and I call it a bias in my writing and the work that I do is a bias towards imperfect action. That I'd rather have people take action and have it fail than not take action, because through the failure you learn how to take the next best action. Whereas, I'm subject to analysis paralysis. I will analyze the hell out of everything for years given the chance and then not take action, and that gets you absolutely nowhere, trust me. And that's the so I think that the bias towards action is a key one, and then if you look at the principles, I also say that we have to treat each other with a bit of compassion, so if you take an action and it turns out to not be a perfect action, then it's better for me to greet that imperfection with compassion than it is to be upset about the fact that you took an imperfect action.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it almost prepares you to receive on that side too. Yeah. Works.
What were you saying, Scott?
I like your approach and model. I just would suggest 2 additions. I agree the bias towards prototype or action is great, but it also needs to be differentiated from others. What else is being done in the market, rather than being herd, as in animals all going the same direction. You should be doing something different that's impactful. And the one piece that I'll use as a word that's not on your list is impactful.
Yeah, no, I agree. You should want to have an
Take
impact.
action for impact is what I would suggest as your alternative.
I think that might come in when it's not managing for a crisis, right?
But that's for impact too.
Matters more when it's not a crisis, right? And a crisis, like without the crisis, the bleeding portion doesn't have to happen. It's just have a plan.
Yeah. But I mean, if you think about what it is you want to achieve, whatever you want to achieve, even in a crisis, you want to think about what is that impact that you want to have? What is it you want to deliver? If you're just running around curing the problem and you lose that impact, and I think that's really where the principles come in, is that defines that impact that you want to have. The actions are just the actions. They're just the steps you have to take. But that's why you have to start with who you are, and you have to develop the principles, right? So in my model for getting the things that you want, we start with the idea of you have to define that vision. You have to re-believe what's possible, define what impact you want to have, and then you can move into taking the actions that are going to actually get you there. So I want to end this at least. Go ahead.
No, I said I just think that helps. That just enables action that much more easily, right? If you know what you're working towards, that impact, then the actions become so much more apparent, or somewhat more apparent. And you've got that light at the end of the tunnel thing going on too, where you feel like you're not just taking action to take action. It's not just action for action's sake. It's actually moving towards something, which I think is equally as important.
Well, what you create by defining the impact you want to have, and defining what that future is you create a stick-to-itiveness. You create the ability to continue to operate, right? Yeah. Even if you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, you can see a few feet in front of you, and you know where you're going, and you've got that journey defined. And that is critical to actually getting to the end of the tunnel, right? When you don't have that, when you haven't defined that aspect of what it is you're trying to do, then you're just doing stuff. And the problem I see, not in crisis management, but in management in general, is if you are just doing stuff, it's not scalable. It's not growable. It's not human-centric. It's just doing stuff, right? And we see this, Scott, with people pitching us in the Angels. They're just doing stuff. There's magic when you have clearly defined the stuff that you're doing and a plan for delivering it, and you can clearly articulate that. It's like honey, and everybody around you is bees. And it's remarkable when that happens. And we can see it when people pitch. When all those things come together, everybody wants to talk to them afterwards and have a beer and invest in the company. It doesn't matter what the product is. but the impact matters.
But I'll add one observation for where that magic is, and I'm going to use your word abundance for a moment. There are no bad ideas, just bad timing. Sometimes people are early or late. It's not that their idea is bad, it's just the wrong time. And I think COVID and the riots or the disruptions are proving that in a lot of ways. Is sometimes people are bringing things out that are the wrong timing or the wrong message. Not that it's a bad idea, just you need to get it at the right time and place. Otherwise, it's the wrong thing to serve.
Yeah, like launching a gym right now is probably, it's not a bad idea to have a gym, but it's probably the wrong time to launch one. Ultimately.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I would like to end the recording with a little plug, right? So for Rosenberg Chesnov, you can get more information about us at rcmycpa.com COVID/19 updates. This is our COVID resource page, which I'm updating on a regular basis. You can also subscribe to our newsletter where we keep people informed on finance, accounting, and at the moment, lots of COVID-related issues because that's keeping us up at night. At some point, we'll talk about other things like where you can find cash, how to create an investable business, some of those things. But at the moment, back to Scott's comment on timing, we're really focusing on COVID. The other thing that I do offer professional help. I help walk people through this. My normal, business rate, they like to charge me out at $4.60 an hour, but I've managed to negotiate with my boss a little bit better terms here. So I can do $1,500 for 6 sessions to really walk people through creating their plan, defining that impact that they want to have, defining their plan, defining their principles, and then creating something so that they can do it. In my experience, 6 sessions pretty much covers it, as long as the person is engaged and they want to deliver, because I can guide you what to do in 6 sessions, but if you don't actually take any action, then you might as well keep your money in your pocket and don't bother, right? Because it's all about action, right? If you don't do it, you're not going to get the results. That's all there is to it. All right, guys. So that's all I've got.
That's great.
Awesome.
That was awesome.
There we go. That's my question slide.
It's going to tilt here. All right. Awesome. Well, Jeff, thanks a bunch. That was great. That was just very enjoyable. Lots of information, easily digestible, like we said before, which I think is important, especially when you're tackling stuff like this. People need it in a digestible fashion. Otherwise, it just becomes just too much. But thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording now, and until next time.